Okay, welcome everyone to our seventh session of Gurdjieff Unveiled, studying the principles of Fourth Way, sponsored by the Theosophical Society of America. Our book was written by Sy Ginsburg, who has been with us for 4 of these weeks, but he's not with us the rest of the time. So Harry Gray and myself, Gwen Mayer, are your facilitators. And I want to say that we're getting down to the practical work of Fourth Way, which I enjoy very much because, as you probably all do, it's very important to know that you can combine the learning that you've had, Theosophy, Rosicrucian, Christian, Indian, Hindu, all of these Taoists go back into really practical work that probably existed 10,000 years ago. Gurdjieff, in his wisdom, of course, wrote quite a bit and brought all these things together for practical experience. So we're going to talk about practical experience today. These are my favorite things. I'm a Jungian analyst. I use a lot of Maurice Nicole's work, and I have studied, of course, with Sy for years and been working alongside and use this in my principle and probably never mentioned Gurdjieff's name. I use it in my astrology and everything. So I'm going to turn it over to Harry, and Harry, you can get us started here.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome. Last week we talked about how we tend to leak our energies and not have enough to work on ourselves. But if we learn how to restrict the leakage or to stop it, we will have more energy to work on ourselves. And as a task, we were to observe our leaking of energies 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. And where does it come from? What centers, etc. I will start with my own observations. I wasn't able to do it 3 times a day, but I was able to do it at least once or twice a day. But I have 3 particular observations. One is when I notice myself rocking in the chair that I'm in, which is like this. It can be very annoying to people who watch it. And when I catch myself doing it, in a sense that I can see where it can be a leakage of energy because I'm doing it mechanically, even though it's a minor amount of energy, and it can be annoying to other people. So I stop myself doing it, and I observe where is it coming from. All I can say is it's mechanical. I'm not aware of doing it. I don't know what center I would be in, unless it would most likely is the moving center, the instinctive part of the moving center, perhaps. So I stop it. And when I do that, it is, of course, less annoying, and I do save a certain amount of energy, even though it's hardly noticeable unless I wish to work on myself and observe it and then to stop it, because it is something I wish not to do. This afternoon, I was having my breakfast, and I spilt egg on the floor. It was a law of accident. I had the dish on the table. I was doing something else. My elbow hit the spoon. The spoon was in the dish. It flipped up. Some of the egg splattered all over the floor, so I had to clean it up. And when I noticed it, I noticed myself getting annoyed and getting frustrated with myself for having to do it. It lasted only for a second, but I caught myself, and so I just went ahead and cleaned it up. Now, I could have gone on and on, being very frustrated, annoyed, and angry with myself, but that would have been a tremendous amount of waste of energy. And for what purpose? What for? What was it going to do? Nothing. just make it worse and maybe even have an effect on something else. The most interesting observation of the week was for quite a few years, I had a book that belonged to somebody else. And I won't go into the reasons why I kept the book so long. And of course, it always bothered me, and I felt a little bit guilty about it and so forth. Well, maybe a little bit more than a little guilty. But it was a relative. And so, it was a special book for me. And Harry thought that perhaps that, he had a right to this book. But over the years, it just kept eating at me. And so I just decided to, finish scanning it, which I was originally wanted to do, scan it into the computer to preserve it in our genealogy and so forth. So I did that. Then I contacted her and told her I was sorry and I'm going to return the book and so forth, which I did. And that had stopped the leakage of energy of my feeling guilty or negative about myself, and call it preventing karma or resolving karma, whatever you want to call it. But it was a type of leaking of energy that I had kept that book so long. It resulted in my wanting to return it because I didn't want the energy to continue leaking. And so that was done. So that was a great example of leaking of energies.
I have something to say.
Okay, great.
I actually wasn't focusing on it, but something occurred, and the negative idol, identifying with and expressing negative emotion, I think is what it was. It's definitely been a leak on my energy. I was visiting a friend who's in the hospital, and he had asked, his sister was there, and he had asked us to do a couple things. And I mean, he's really weak. He's in sad condition, but he asked if we could do something that we had already done, which was to pull his gown down over his leg or something. And the second time he asked it, I said, "Oh, and what do you need now?" And I don't know if he even thought anything of it, but for me, I was hearing it, I was observing, I thought, oh my gosh, this is something that my dad would have said when I was a kid. What do you need now, Carol? And here I was saying it to him, and the last thing I wanted to do was to be impatient because he really needs help. So that's just thinking about that and seeing it, I can see how it can be such a drain on my energy that I'm doing something that I'm not even conscious of. However, I guess the thing that concerns me most is how often do I do that? Do I do it to other people? And it's kind of a little horror for me to imagine. But that's it.
So that brings up what we're going to talk about too, Carol, is that judgment about you. Like how often do I do that? And oh my God, So I have that same feeling sometimes. But, the work is riddled with self-judgment, with our inability to just be conscious on the moment. What are we doing now? So your dad may not have meant it the way he said it, but that's something I say to myself all the time. What are you doing right now? How does your voice sound right now? Because the minute it gets out of the now, we start judging. And judging is what we're going to come up against here in a little while, and I'm going to talk because that's part of internal considering. So, Harry, let's go on to unnecessary talking, which we're doing right now, unnecessary talking.
Okay, unnecessary talking. A common way to waste energy is talking. We talk too much, constantly, in fact, and not only to ourselves, but to others. Now, I think unnecessary talking can express itself verbally and perhaps even mentally. We're always talking inside our head, too. Now, what is unnecessary talking? Well, it's talking about something you really don't need to talk about, something that is irrelevant, uh, something that is not particular to an important situation, to the here and now. It has no aim, no purpose. It just talking for talking's sake. Now, in my family, there's a extended family. I won't say who, but everything that she observed and see during the daytime, during her waking period during the day, she would always have to comment on or talk about. Absolutely incredible. We would visit her and for a week, let's say, for example, and I honestly believe that I wouldn't be able to get more than a few sentences out, to her, and during that week. And whatever she talked about really wasn't, most of it anyway, wasn't, but was most of it was irrelevant. So there were some people like that. So that's a tremendous amount of waste of energy, and I think we are all like that one way or another, on a different scale, of course, from small to whatever. And so that's unnecessary talking. And it's mechanical. It's in the moving center. Sometimes, most often, more than not, we're not aware of it. So whenever we talk and have something to say, we should say it. If we're in a group of people, we should only talk about something that's relevant. If we wish to save energy, if we are to stop leaking the energy, and if we observe our mental talking, we should just call a stop and try to think of something else, something a little bit more creative, perhaps an exercise, perhaps counting backwards from 100 to 1, by two numbers, like 100, then 98, 96, and then 94, and so forth, all the way back to 1, to exercise the mind, the attention, and also to prevent that inner talking.
I wanted to say something real quick.
Go ahead.
In my profession, I'm a psychotherapist, so of course when people make appointments with me, they want to tell me their story. And if you're a therapist or in the helping profession, you know how that feels to be listening to the same story over and over. One of the things I do, because I do have compassion for these people, I feel like I'm a priest, hearing confession. But one of the things I do is I say, so tell me how you're feeling right now. What's going on with your feeling? Because that moves them out of that moving center.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're up against incessant talking, even when I'm talking too much, I'll say, how are you feeling right now? To myself, so that observing self is observing me. My tone of voice, when I become very monotone, obviously I'm like, oh my God, I'm repeating myself, I'm talking too much. And sometimes I just have to say, okay, Gwen, shut up now. I'll say it out loud. Because the truth is, it's the only way I get my attention. You see? So there's all kinds of ways to notice what it is and to practice, because we do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And like Carrie said, sometimes it's in our heads. We're talking to ourselves. I know at night, before I go to sleep, if I'm talking too much in my head, I have tremendous conversations in my head. I cannot go to sleep. So I have to listen to music. I have to calm myself down, because that unnecessary talking is going on the inner planes as well. Okay, so anyway, um, let's move on here because we've got a lot to cover. Now I'm going to go over inner considering, mainly because it is a big part of both inner considering and considering are a big part of the fourth way work. It's a state of being where what other people think of me, and especially of being unhappy about not receiving from others the admiration, love I think are due to me. So when you are observing yourself in a crowd with your family, with your mate, with anyone, you're also looking at what you're inner considering, like is she really listening to me, or does he really even care what I say? You know, it's like a self judgment that keeps it just keeps going on and on and on. So we all have this inner considering. Like right now, you're sitting there, and I can imagine what you're thinking. Y'all are all quiet, thank God, because I couldn't talk, right? So I'm thinking, well, Gwen, you're talking too much, so let them talk. So what I want to know is, especially Carol and people who've been in the work for a while, how you approach the inner considering in you about what other people think and that type of thing. And we are conditioned with this, my dears, since childhood. You know, Gwen, you know, Gwen talks too much, or Gwen, that type of thing. So, Carol, go for it.
Yeah, this is something that I find because I was raised that everything had to be, well, I figured out that if I did everything perfectly, that I would have a much easier time in life at home. And so throughout most of my adulthood, I always wanted to be perfect. And for the last 10 years, I tell people I've been working on being perfectly imperfect. But there is a thought, and I have noticed it lately. And what I do is, like, I've been noticing that I'll wake up worrying about some client that I have to do something, and in the way back of my mind, it's not in the forefront, but I've noticed that there's a fear that they're going to be upset with me. And so what I've been doing is I kind of talk to myself and I go, okay, little Carol, you don't have to think this way anymore. Your clients love you. You're doing good work, and that we can put that thought to bed. But even though I do that, it'll still pop up. And it's really a relief to be able to notice that it's a separate little I that doesn't need to be here anymore.
Okay, so does everyone understand, like on this last sentence here, these are really two sides of the same coin. We need to look at internal considering from both aspects. What other people do think, because you do have to size yourself up, but you want to do it realistically, not like Steve said, with it crazy thinking. Like if I was around Harry's friend or family friend that talked too much, I would think to myself, am I not important enough that they know how important I am? You see, that they're talking so much. I would be looking at what Gwen thinks about Gwen, So am I really listening to all of that, you see? Anyway, we will go on here, and Harry, negative and idle imagination. Harry?
As you can see, this will talk about other things that related to what we've talked about previously at the beginning. So all this stuff is related. Negative thinking, daydreaming, internal, external considering, and negative and idle imaginary thought. It's all related. So it's almost inseparable, but you can separate them to talk about them in its specifics. Negative imagination. Well, it can take the form of daydreaming, of course, but negative, I think, in the aspect of that you're thinking ill or bad of, or taking something that is real and they're just flavoring it all with types of imagination and stuff that isn't real, but you kind of worry about, so you add to it and you make it a type of negative imagination and making it worse than it actually is. So you could relate it to worrying about something that's going on in your life and just adding to it. Really, that's what you're doing. So you're not constructive. You're not taking it constructively. If you catch yourself doing it, try to change it. Try to make something constructive and creative about it. If you need to ponder it and think about it, turn it into something active instead of something passive. Passive means that it takes on virtually a life of its own, I suppose, in this case. Active means you're trying to do something with it constructively, creatively with it. It's actually the wrong work of the thinking center. By that I mean it's most likely the negative part of the thinking center. It could be the negative part of the moving part of the negative part of the thinking center, if you want to go into the subcenters. Each center, thinking, emotional, movement, instinctive, sexual, has its own form of imagination and daydreaming. And so you can in that, if once you realize that and see where you can see where it's coming from, and that'll give you more options on how to change it. But you have to separate these centers somehow. If you really wish not to think of something in a negative way, you can actually change your center. Instead of thinking about it, doing something more emotional, more happy. Read a book.
Let me butt in here. The way you change those centers that Harry's talking about is through self-observation.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you make changes. So, even though we're talking about all this stuff, changing centers, moving centers, it's good to know, because ideally you want to observe yourself in a collected state. The collected state is being aware of all centers at once and expressing from those centers. So, Harry, I'm going to let you continue but I want you to see that this whole thing about Gurdjieff's work is about observation, about being in the now. Okay.
One important thing about all this is that, if you have these negative thoughts, these negative imaginations, daydreamings, what have you, some of it can be fantastical. I mean, that's why you see on the bookshelves all these fantastic fantasy novels that are inches thick. It's incredible. All this comes from somebody's imagination. But you need to remember that, it's, you might ask yourself, is there something wrong with me? Why am I thinking like this? Am I becoming schizophrenic or whatever, but no, everybody thinks and has these types of negative imaginations and daydreamings and fantastical thoughts. But if you ask them about it, they may most likely deny it, because, it's something, people don't like to have known about themselves.
Well, where has your creative, fantastical thoughts sent you in your writing, for instance, a screenplay?
They're not fantastical, and they're not negative.
No, but they're positive. So we don't want you to, because out of this imagining comes tremendous creativity.
All right. But I obviously the story is on my mind. a lot. And so I have to imagine myself back in 1697 in those situations, and also how I want it to see portrayed on the screen creatively. Camera angles, how people act, and so forth, and how you would like to give them the tools you want to give them to act, to make them act the way you want the audience to see them act, and have the character portrayed the way you want it portrayed. So we're talking about Indians, raids, killings, scalping. There's a lot of stuff in this film, and historically the events happened, but it's the detail that you have to think about, and also in conjunction with your aim about doing the film. In my case, the aim is making showing the perspectives of both sides, the Indians and the settlers, and the healing of the animosity towards the main character of the film, which is my ancestor, and try to resolve animosities and the wounds that are still open and raw even today after over 300 years.
Yeah, I want to add to that when Harry is making this film and writing the screenplay, he's observing. He's observing and bringing all these centers together within the film. So when you think about it, if you become an observer of your life as if you're creating a film, a movie of your life, that is a great way to self-remember. Start looking, observing from like he's observing to write this book, you see. And even though he's having to use his imagination, he's also having to use facts. He's having to use a level of understanding. How do you draw it together to understand? For those of you who write books, who write poetry, who write your story, it's very important to see it from someone else's point of view, to draw it together, so that you're observing not from a real bias, not from, oh my God, will the people love what I'm saying, but you're observing from drawing all facets together, all centers together, okay, and being aware of all centers, both negative and positive. So identifying with and expressing negative emotions, how do you do that? And this is where the drain of energy comes. When you're expressing negative, you talked about drains of energy. I mean, you know how badly you feel about yourself when you've expressed negative. I know I feel bad. Gwen feels horrible. So that's a real drain of my energy. Okay, and so identifying and expressing negative emotions is and it is conditioned within us to not feel negative emotions from childhood. We are taught not to feel negative emotions. So you're looking at yourself in this movie you've created about yourself. You've got to see how you have taken anger, emotion, feeling, and taken it to an inner level because you weren't maybe allowed to express it freely. It's a wonder that any of us grew up, actually. So I think that it's at the root of illnesses, depression, everything, this inability to express negative emotion. And I'm not talking about the dramas that we create. I'm talking about being happy, being sad, being frustrated, being angry. Think of all those things that you try to, or I try to deter myself from so that I'm acceptable. Because you don't want to see me angry, obviously. So I have to find a way of releasing that where I'm not hurting someone else with it. Because it is my anger.
When we express negative emotions, we have to realize that it is always provoked by something outside. If we have a negative emotion and we are expressing it, it's because we are reacting from something outside. It's always a person, not a thing, that makes us negative. And when you think about it, that seems to be an accurate statement. And when we express our negative emotions mechanically, we are actually increasing it and we become more negative. So that's all the more reason we should try and stop and observe ourselves. We have a right not to express our negative emotions. All we have to do is just observe ourselves. And nobody really wants to be negative. Nobody really wants to be mad. We just have to stop and look at ourselves, observe ourselves, and to catch ourselves doing it. And then we can change it. We can change ourselves. We can change the moment. If we take it further, as we mechanically add to it and increasing the negativity, the end result could very easily be in hurting ourselves or somebody sooner or later. And so you can see the devastation negativity can cause. I mean, it has resulted in riots and even in war. So it's very important that we should catch ourselves doing it and, try and change the moment in the situation. And it's very easily to find examples of this. I mentioned riots, war, even in feuds. Take the historical case of the Hatfields and McCoys. Eventually it resolved itself, but it took years and years to do.
And what Harry's talking about is external considering as well. So if you're looking at your outside causing your inside reaction, you need to also, in order to reconcile that, you have to learn to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Just by doing that alone takes you out of your own judgment of yourself. For instance, if I'm up at the grocery store and the clerk I'm upset because of them, that's my big thing. I don't like lines. I don't like to stand in line. I don't like when the clerk has to get, how you're in a line of 5, I'm in a line of 5 people. The clerk has to get clearance because somebody used the wrong charge card or whatever. And my chief feature, which we'll go into later, is impatience. So, of course, I go into a whole rage on the inner level. But I know well, if I put myself in the place of that clerk who's doing her job, she's up against somebody who doesn't have the right amount of money or it's a false card or something, I can learn to deal with my impatience. So this external considering is very important in reconciling, because other people are going to make you irritable, tired, whatever, but the only reconciliation you have is by seeing life from their point of view, by putting yourself in their shoes. That is called compassion in many terms. But I noticed that when Harry's talking about these negative feelings, they usually are always caused by some external event that's happening that triggers a reaction. And the reaction is not necessarily a good or bad. It is, but when you're reactive, you are identified and you're taken. That's what we call it. You're just taken. Go ahead, Harry.
If you don't know how to externally consider in a particular moment, that is what to say or how to respond, what you can do, you can act as if. That means, if you feel like, shouting at somebody, if you feel like pushing them out of the way, if you feel like letting them know that you don't have enough time. You need to stop this so you can go on and so forth. If you don't know how to externally consider what you do, you act as if you really understand that person. You act as if you understand enough so that you agree with that person's opinion, point of view, when you really don't, and you can't support it by your own argument. But you act as if you do understand. You agree with your neighbor, even though you don't. And it's also called, in our work, it's only mentioned in a few books, and I may get to one example shortly. It's called the law of otherwise. It is mentioned, I believe, in Beelzebub's Tales maybe once, but it's called otherwise, and you would act other than a way you normally would not act, or you would act in a way that you don't really feel like acting, but it corresponds with your aim to try and resolve a conflict or something.
I want to say something about that too, Harry. When Harry said that, immediately all the hackles in the back of my head go, oh my God, I have to act as if I agree with this person when I don't agree with this person. This is the hardest thing to do. Don't try it if you can't abide it. This is one of the things that really, I literally have to jump through hoops. But once I think Gwen is right, Gwen has to get her opinion out, I've already been taken. I'm identified. I'm already identified. So what's the harm of acting as if? You see, because my reaction is already, Gwen is so important here, her opinion is so relative, and it does not agree with this person. You see? Am I saying, oh, Gwen, you need to keep your mouth shut, which I probably should? You see, I have to have a conversation with myself in order to even do what Harry's talking about. And even then, I'm taken. So this is not a real easy. This is very difficult. I'm sure you've worked for people before where you have to justify your actions. You have to agree with them and you don't agree with them. Oh my God. At 76, I've got a whole library of things that I don't agree with.
In our group, we have something called the Golden Rule Project. I think Gwen might have heard of it, maybe some of the others. It's a project that was started by the Utah group, I believe.
And from the Dalai Lama. Yeah.
Came from the Dalai Lama. And we've all heard this from the Bible, in Christianity. But you will find evidence of it, but worded differently in almost all the major religions of the world, going back to antiquity. And it's do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And that is all what we are talking about here. It's a very simple statement. And the project is to make other people aware of it. And if you're involved in the work long enough, you will come across it. It's called the Golden Rule Project.
So this brings us to, because we're going to run out of time, this is the hardest thing that's on your screen right now. It's the hardest thing we've had to learn. And Carol Russ Schreiber, this is one of the first things that we did in his group when he first started it. And it irritated me to death. Okay, so your chief feature, and Harry's going to talk a little bit about what Irma Popov said about it. Our big button. Gurdjieff spoke often of chief feature or chief fault, a central feature in the personality about which one's whole life revolves. Well, my chief feature, which I don't like, but obviously it's my chief fault, is impatience. You can even hear it in my voice when I'm impatient about running out of time. Oh my God, here I'm moving along. I have to almost dramatize it. It is usually the negative emotion with which we identify most strongly. It is difficult to determine whether we have just one or more than one chief feature. Gurdjieff talked about it as one, but other practitioners of the work have seen in themselves more than one chief feature. This feature is almost always the result of early childhood conditioning. And for this reason, it is, as Gurdjieff says, necessary to see and to study, identify to the very roots of oneself. Now, Russ asked us to ask our family members, because nobody likes to see this, guys. And so you have to ask the people that have witnessed you from childhood to start telling you this stuff. And I'm telling you, it's not easy. I noticed, I wrote the Tyrant Within thing. I put that picture up because it is a tyrant. It runs your life. Necessary to see and study, identify to its roots, the psychological self-examination necessary to discover one's chief feature is a long-term process. The nature of our chief feature is difficult to discover without outside help. So this isn't something that you can say. You're going to have good, close friends tell you about this. I put a few of these down. So I'm impatient. I don't get my way. Oh my God. So everything falls apart. I have to get my way. So that overrules everything. See, so my chief feature is impatience. Now, I know people in the helping profession and their families don't tell them this, but I see martyrdom. Like, I'm doing this for someone else. I'm doing this to help someone else. I'm not doing it for myself. So you notice how these things slide next to each other. I'm guilty of all of this stuff, but impatience is my chief feature. You see? So, Harry, do you want to say a little bit about what Popoff said about it?
I will just add a little bit more to what you have said. Chief feature is the one thing in yourself that you must work on if you wish to change your level of being. It's the most important thing for you to work on. It is the axis around which everything else, your personality, your false personality, evolves. And if you were told your chief feature, you would most likely disagree with it, or would say, no, that can't be me. And it's very, very difficult for us to see what our chief feature is unless it is pointed out by someone who really knows. But if we were told our chief feature and we agreed with it, for example, that would prevent us or actually even hinder our efforts on working on ourselves. So that is why it's inherent that, we usually do not recognize or even agree if somebody has told us what our chief feature is. A moment ago, appeared on the screen a book called The Tyrant Within. The title is taken from a reference in Bill Zebub's Tales to his grandson. And my teacher, Irmis Popoff, has written her experience with chief feature. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs. During a talk on chief feature in 1946, Ouspensky had told an American group that one had to see it by oneself to believe it. Then curiously, after, and she states, I must have done something very stupid, and he appeared to be very angry with me. He told her, you are always inventing things. Yes, inventing things. That is your chief feature. He added, now you are luckier than most people. You know what most people spend years trying to find out. Use it. She did not apply this knowledge right away. However, her account of the incident shows that it helped her understand another aspect of the work teaching. The chief feature revelation had followed a volley of uncalled for abuse, which she bore very well. I bless him today for all those apparent injustices that taxed my understanding. What other occasion would I have ever had to learn how to bear impatiently and to try to understand otherwise if it had not baffled me. As implied, Mrs. Popoff was not quite ready to receive this gift of knowledge of her chief feature. She believes that all that saved her from losing the splendid boon was her custom of recording all she could recall of work lectures. After Ouspensky's death, she worked with one of the American groups organized by Gurdjieff. She continued to wonder about her chief feature, without once recalling my notes of Ouspensky's words. Years later, however, she chanced to come across those key notes. I remembered also how he spoke at the time. I had kept busy talking to myself, saying to me that I must accept the scolding because, no doubt, he wanted to test me. I felt the struggle I had faced with myself, my rebellion at his injustice, my feeling that he should have known very well that I not only did not invent things, but even tried not to see or hear anything that did not concern me. Now, in retrospect, I saw myself clearly, inventing in my sleep while he spoke, therefore unable to grasp the gem that was given to me. I saw my chief feature as a metal, its sides advantageous or harmful, useful or useless, desirable or undesirable, depending on which one of them I flipped. This explained contradictions in myself, and opposites too, and buffers. And I realized that that chief feature as I, and that only when I sacrifice me, may the obverse and reverse sides of the metal that represents my essence unite validly to make me one, whole. Yes, I must work on myself. Chief feature must weaken, until through chief feature itself I gain the very thing that I have sacrificed. Chief feature must gain its treasure and give way to itself, otherwise. This seemingly belated discovery also made her feel that all her work efforts through the years were simply movements made still in comfortable sleep. She felt the relevance of Ouspensky's words. Our work is not the path. The path is very far away from us. And that describes her experience discovering chief feature as told her by Mr. Ouspensky.
Thanks, Harry. Carol, do you want to have anything to say about the chief feature?
I'm still trying to figure mine out.
Well,
Go ahead. It's not simple.
I was told mine only because I was sharing an experience of, and I had to stop and think because I won't share the experience because it'll take too long. But I didn't know whether to agree with it or not. I just kept thinking about it, and well, it could be my chief feature, but it was something very, very powerful. And the longer I had thought about it, the more I tend to agree that it might be my chief feature. But then I also wondered, maybe I have some other minor chief features, so I don't know. So the possibility exists that there may be other chief features, but there is one major powerful chief feature above the others, if that is the case.
Well, you want to look at that which you resist persists. So that's the way I found that my impatience overrules all the other negative qualities, because it persists no matter what. So I don't like to look at what I resist, but it is the meat of my work. Like Harry said, when I see myself being impatient, that is the time when I need to be most observant. And Gurdjieff over and over used to say, do what you do not want to do. To really learn about yourself. Pick some hard things to do. Do what you don't want to do. Like, okay, I don't like going without my half a cup of ice cream every night, but I have been. Now, am I proud of that? Not really. But I watch my emotional content, my reaction to everything, because I'm doing what I don't want to do, which is give up something I dearly love. Because that was a reward in our family from time immemorial. Ice cream at night before we went to bed. So, it goes back to childhood conditioning too. So, yes, it is. And mine is definitely first to 10th house squares, Uranus square Mars. So it's very, very connected on an astrological level. This is our last week, and this is our exercise. An exercise in consciousness, internal considering during this next week as a fourth way exercise. Let us look at one of the categories of identification that drain us of energy, the category of internal considering. When you go into a supermarket or restaurant, notice your impatience with the slowness of the service, the uncaring attitude of the assistants, the lack of the merchandise or food for which you came. In my case, it's forgetfulness of why I came to the grocery store to begin with. The lack of the any of the other irritations are commonly found in this situation, like standing in line, whatever. Yeah, I'm bringing my own stuff into it, but that's inner considering. Or when you're working, the rudeness of your clients or customers. Observe yourself and thoughts and emotions that are going through you. One of my other things is when my clients are late. And I got to knock on wood, my clients are very seldom late. But I feel inside of me, if they were late, I would probably say I don't want to see them anymore, to my own detriment. So, just watch what really gets you. You see, don't try to talk yourself out of it. Just watch your energy when you're in the middle of it, okay? Make it simple for you, because these exercises are supposed to be simple. They bring up enough emotion that you've got to watch yourself. Okay, Harry, do you have anything to say? We're at the end of our hour.
No, just read the next or the last chapter in the manual. It talks a lot about meditation. If you want to try and go ahead also to do some of the meditation exercises listed in the manual, try one or two of them, see how you do. You may have questions. That'll probably help to raise some questions if you have anything about the chapter.
Yes, and remember too that Gurdjieff's music and his movements were also a form of meditation. And one of the things Gwen has trouble with is sitting quietly. But so I have to do my meditation early in the morning before Gwen gets noisy. Okay, so I have to catch her off guard to do an hour's sitting. Well, and see that thing, I'm telling you, I think Nancy Pelosi's daughter also said, when my mother decides to make a deal with you and negotiates with you, it's like your head's been cut off and you don't feel the bleeding. So I don't know how you would do that, but like I said, this chart on the deal, it tells you some major things. You want to try to get to the major chief feature. Like I said, I'm guilty of all this. And Candace, I will give you the shirt off my back, and then I will control the way you wear it. And and what you're going to wear it with. So I totally get that part. That would be under self-deprecation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Next week.
everyone.
Bye-bye.